Company of Heroes 3 has dropped, and it's a ton of fun blowing up the battlefields of World War II, but figuring out what each unit does and how to use it has been quite a challenge. Today I'm going to clear some things up and go over the entire roster of the US forces so you know exactly how to use them before you dive in. Starting with the infantry, first up we have the Scout Squad. These are an early game recon unit that want to be used to scout out the map, take early resource points, and spot approaching units, more than they want to be used for actual combat. They have medium range and fire rate weapons with the M1 Garands, so are completely middle of the road in terms of firepower. However, their lower manpower means that they more often than not find themselves outgunned, and without support or excellent positioning, this will result in their doom. With the utility package, they can use recon flares to reveal a target location and a smoke rifle grenade to lower the line of sight of units in the target area and prevent them from firing. Their veterancy skills are stealth recon, which gives line of sight and reveals nearby enemy units, but when doing this they cannot capture territory or shoot and move extremely slowly, or passive healing. Either one of these is a good pick, but stealth recon fits more of their playstyle if you can get them in a hidden location and use them as wards to warn of incoming enemy units. Next up, the engineer squad. The engineers are obviously the builders of the roster, with their main use being to build defenses. They have a wide selection of what to build, whether you want cover for your own units, block enemy movements, or set explosive traps, or even increase your own income. Making use of these defenses can make holding territory into a breeze, so make sure you use everything at your disposal. Also, late game or when you have the resources to spare, building resource caches on as many points as possible will ensure maximum income and keep snowballing your side to victory. Outside of building, they're also great for repairing buildables and vehicles, so are a must-have for basically the entire game to keep your powerful units in tip-top shape. By default, they're nothing special in combat, with low range and damage, but decent rate of fire, landing them on the lower end of combat efficacy. However, they can choose to equip a flamethrower in the squad, which will give them a massive boost versus infantry. Alternatively, they can equip a hazard removal package, which will allow them to use a minesweeper and wire cutters to detect and get past enemy defenses. For their veterancy skills, they have Light It Up, which fires a sustained burst of the flamethrower at the target location, or Superior Fieldcraft, which increases construction repair speed. I like to go for the latter since building and repairing is kind of their whole deal, and making them better is more valuable to me than some extra damage. Nearly every other unit is built for damage. These guys can spec into utility as much as they want. Next up, the Rifleman Squad. These are the true middle-of-the-road infantry for the roster. They have 5 Garands and a Tommy gun to excel at medium range combat versus similar units as long as they have good cover. After research, they can also choose to pick up an automatic rifle, which gives them a lot more power in similar combat without sacrificing on range or speed. If the grenade package has been researched, they can use a few skills. Breach allows them to breach a building and force an enemy squad out into the open. Frag grenades can be thrown to cause severe damage in a small area, and sticky bombs, which can be thrown at enemy vehicles to cause major damage as well as having a chance to snare or cause engine damage. Their veterancy skills, we have Pour It On Them, which increases their rate of fire and allows them to deal suppression damage, and Sprint, which increases their movement speed for a short time. Again, either one of these is a good choice. If you're attacking, then Sprint is good for some quick positioning, and if you're defending, then Suppression is always useful. Next up we have the Bazooka Squad, and these are of course the anti-vehicle infantry units of the roster, with their powerful bazookas capable of taking out vehicles several times their size and power. They also have a couple of grants for infantry combat, but most of the time they want to avoid this to stay healthy for any vehicular warfare. They come with a couple of skills right out the gate. Destroy Obstacle allows them to fire their bazookas at a target location and destroy things such as walls and hazards, and Anti-Tank Satchel Charges, which can be thrown from a close range at a target vehicle for massive damage. They also have their veterancy skills. Tactical Movement increases speed and makes the unit harder to hit, and White Phosphorus Rockets, which deal area burn damage and block line of sight. Again, either are great choices, with movement being better if you often find them running away from enemy fire, and Phosphorus if they're in a lot of fights versus infantry. Overall, these are literally a glass cannon that can devastate enemy vehicles but are just as easily taken out by pretty much everything. Work on keeping them in a safe location during combat to take out key targets without attracting too much attention. Next up we have the Snipers, and I do really love these guys. Snipers are one-man squads, so very limited in the HP department, and are easily taken out if they get caught out in the open. Using cover with them is essential, so getting them in dugouts or buildings is a must. Their high-powered, long-range rifles can pick off infantry units with scary precision, so give them plenty of support to keep the heat off them and let them work. For their veterancy skills, you have Stealth Recon, which we covered in the Scout Squad, and Medkit, which allows them to self-heal while outside of combat. Since I like to use them to hold an area, the Recon isn't really useful, so I'd go for the Medkit so they can stay in tip-top condition, even if they're a little separated from the rest of the army. Moving on now to the weapons teams, first up we have the M1 Mortars. Mortars are of course your long-range anti-infantry artillery. If you set them up relatively close to where combat is likely to take place, they'll fire on any units in their very long range and deal massive damage to enemies regardless of cover. Of course, they still need protection since the 4-man team doesn't really come with any other actual weapons to look after themselves other than a couple of Grands that don't really do anything, so use them more as part of a coordinated force rather than lone fighters. They come with a couple of skills right out the gate. High Explosive Barrage, which fires a barrage at regular shells at a target location, dealing massive damage to anything caught in the area, and Smoke Barrage, which does the same but with smokes, which will of course block line of sight for most units. They also have their veterancy skills. Airburst Barrage causes damage in an area with bigger spread at long ranges, which is useful for hitting a lot of infantry units at once, and Delayed Fuse HE Barrage, which launches shells that detonate after a short delay upon hitting the ground. These are best suited versus emplaced enemies to focus the damage in a smaller area. Both of these are great versus their respective targets, so just pick one you're up against more, but as a rule of thumb, Airburst will be better for defense, and Delayed will be better for attack. Next up, we have the M1919 Machine Gun Team. These are one of the best units for fending off enemy infantry, and with the right cover can hold a location even when heavily outnumbered. They do have to pick a direction to set up before firing, but once they do, they fire rapidly at enemies at medium range and are almost impossible to outgun without vehicles or excellent flanking. I recommend using these guys in a firing position created by engineers to give them cover from all directions. Not only does the MG deal massive damage, it also suppresses infantry in the arc of fire, heavily reducing their efficacy in basically every way. With all this, they're a heavily defensive focused unit, as the slow speed and setup can mean you'll need to have them in the right position before fighting starts to ensure they don't lose half of their health before even firing a shot. For their veterancy skills, cover training increases their survivability in the open and light cover, essentially making them tougher when not in the most optimal of cover, and button vehicle, which reduces the line of sight and speed of the vehicle. I'd go for cover training as the buttons shouldn't really be needed, as they should be exclusively targeting infantry rather than getting involved in vehicles. And our final weapon team is the M1 Anti-Tank Gun Team. The final weapons team of course focuses on the only area we haven't touched on yet, and that is of course vehicles. This is a slow firing gun that deals massive damage to enemy vehicles with excellent armor penetration and a large range. The unit has no other way to defend itself, so quite like the mortar, use it alongside units to keep it safe when firing, and of course have it focus on any vehicles to get the most value. It comes with armor piercing rounds which grants increased damage and penetration, which can be used when you're up against tough vehicles for some added punch. For the veterancy skills, focus sight increases the line of sight but reduces peripheral vision, essentially meaning they can only see in front of them, but if you're using them in a group, like I said, this shouldn't really be a problem. Embrace, which disables movement and weapons to reduce damage taken for a short time. If they're being focused a lot by mortars and airstrikes, then Brace is a good shout to keep them safe, but if not, Focus Sight is the way to go for a ton more range and vision. These weapon teams are pretty much all defense focused due to the long setup time before they can fire, so set them up to cover choke points and areas you know the enemy will be moving through regularly for the most value. When you do go to attack, by all means move them up, just maybe wait a few seconds until after you've moved up other units to keep them safe and let them set up without being attacked. Coming now to the vehicles, first up we have the quarter-ton 4x4 truck. This is more or less a recon vehicle as it has pretty low HP and armor and only a moderately powerful 30 cal. They can do fine versus one infantry unit, but outside of that, it's not great in actual combat. Instead, what you want to do with these lads is get the command truck upgrade as soon as possible. This increases their line of sight, buffs nearby allied infantry, and unlocks signal detection. Once you've got this, just put them in the middle of your infantry units and you'll have intel on every enemy nearby before they even know that you're there. Plus, they'll gain support veterancy so can level up without even firing a shot. To stop it all off, they can self-repair when out of combat. For their veterancy skills, you have allowing them to capture territory, and resupply platform which lets them deploy MGs, mortars, medical crates, and improve self-repair. Capture seems nice, but like I said, in solo combat they're useless, so if you're capturing territory, then lead help. Likely infantry, and infantry can capture, so what's the point? Instead, resupply is the way to go so you can drop weapons where needed and keep your squads in tip-top shape. Next up we have the M3 Armoured Personnel Carrier. This is a really unique vehicle that seems really basic but quickly becomes pretty complex and extremely powerful. To start off with, it's a standard transport vehicle that can move infantry around the battlefield at decently high speed, so it's great for getting around your slower squads like mortars and MGs. It has a 50 cal, but combat isn't really its strong suit with lower HP and armor. By default, it also comes with the ability to reinforce nearby squads and deploy crew to an abandoned weapon, so it can be great at keeping your troops in tip-top shape on the front lines. For veterancy skills, you have Deploy Salvage Crew, which will target a wrecked vehicle or abandoned weapon and salvage it for resources, or Fortify Position, which increases construction speed of nearby units. It also has 3 upgrades you can choose from. The M45 removes the transport and reinforce abilities to gain quad 50 cals, vastly improving the combat capabilities. It can also attack air, so it's a great unit to have to protect against airstrikes as easily as infantry. The veterancy skills also change. Shoot and Scoot increases speed and makes the vehicle harder to hit and rotate faster, and Button Vehicle, which is the same as the MG team. The 75mm anti-tank conversion also loses the same abilities to gain a 75mm gun, which is obviously great versus any vehicles. It also gains the high explosive barrage skill, so you can dump a ton of fire onto anything in its sights. For veterancy, we now have Target Weak Point, which increases penetration and reduces the target speed as well as disabling its weapons, and First Strike, which increases penetration and accuracy on its first shot fired. And finally, we have the medical conversion, which removes the weapons but gains the ability to heal nearby infantry and weapons teams, essentially creating a mobile medical tent. The unit also now gains its XP through support, and for the veterancy skills we have the same as the base vehicle. Each of these upgrades are powerful units in their own right, so it's worth picking up each depending on what you're up against. The medical upgrade is a must-have for me, since keeping my infantry healthy on the front lines is so crazily powerful. The other two really depend on what you're fighting and what else you have in your army, so I'll leave that down to you. And our final light vehicle is the M8 Greyhound Armoured Car. This is a great all-purpose vehicle, being just as powerful versus infantry as it is versus vehicles, with weapons to deal with both. It's not the toughest in the world, so you do have to avoid anti-vehicle damage where possible, but it can do great versus basically anything you put it up against if used right. It starts off with a 30 cal MG, but this can be upgraded to a 50 for more infantry damage. For the veterancy skills, you have Spotter, which increases the accuracy of nearby allied vehicles, and Seek and Destroy, which increases speed and reveals nearby enemy vehicles in the fog of war and on the minimap, and orders the unit to seek them and destroy them. I like Spotter for buffing all nearby vehicles, but if you're on a bigger map, then Seek and Destroy can be useful for sure. And finally we come to the tanks. First up we have the M24 Shafi Light Tank. This is the cheapest proper tank the US has access to, and for when you unlock it, it's pretty good. It has two 30 cal, so does great versus enemy infantry, and then the 75mm is devastating versus most vehicles outside of the endgame. It's not the toughest in the world, especially versus anti-vehicle units, but it's passable enough when you need it. For the veterancy skills, you have Flanking Speed, which increases speed and acceleration while making the unit harder to hit, which is obviously great for moving around and in combat to get a better angle without taking too many hits, and Seek and Destroy, which we just covered. Flanking Speed would be my pick for something a little more consistently useful. Overall, it's a strong first step into the world of armoured vehicles, and it only gets better from here. Next up we have the M4A1 Sherman Medium Tank. This is very much like the Shafi, in fact it has the exact same weapons of a 75mm and two 30 cals, with an additional 50 cal being available as an upgrade. It'll pretty much do the same job but only better, being a lot tougher, so harder for enemies to take out. It can fight with infantry or other vehicles, and of course the only threat is heavy anti-vehicle damage, so as long as you avoid that, you should be fine. For the veterancy skills, high explosive rounds, which reduces penetration but increases area damage, essentially making it more effective versus infantry but worse versus vehicles, or you have phosphorus rounds, which lower a target vehicle's speed, line of sight, and disables their weapons. Since this is a great multi-purpose tank, you can choose whichever you like for what you're going up against more often. Overall, another great tank, but like I said, just a beefed up Shafi, so nothing too crazy. One last thing is that this and the two remaining tanks can also transfer infantry crews due to their increased size, which is more of a novelty than anything, but it is worth knowing. Next up, the M18 Hellcat Tank Destroyer. This is like the next step from the Sherman, as it's still anti-vehicle but now has an even larger 76mm gun to devastate most vehicles in a single shot. You can also choose to add a 50 cal to give it some added offense versus infantry, but by default all you get is the main gun, so I'd highly recommend doing this. It also comes with the Flanking Speed skill by default. For the veterancy skills, we have High Explosive Barrage or First Strike. Either of these are plenty powerful, with the Barrage being better versus infantry, and the First Strike being better versus vehicles. This being a vehicle killer tank, I'd probably go for the latter. Not much more to say about this one, it's a tank killer, so use it to kill tanks. And finally we have the Bulldozer M4195 Sherman Tank. This is the top of the line tank on the roster, and it's not too hard to see why. You have dual 30 cals for infantry with the optional 50 cal upgrade, you have a 105mm howitzer that can obliterate buildings and vehicles with ease, and to top it all off, you have a lowerable dozer blade that will plow through any obstacles and is put in front of you, such as sandbags, mines, and pretty much anything else. It is a beast in every sense of the word, and damn hard to get rid of. For the veterancy skills, you have Bunker Buster Barrage, which will deal massive area of effect damage with a bonus versus emplacements, and Incendiary Barrage, which will cause burn damage in an area that gets less accurate over long ranges. For the full effect, I feel like you have to go for Bunker Buster, but Incendiary is also strong versus infantry, so as always, go with what you need at the time. This is a tank that you want to lead your charges that will more often than not result in victory. Just make sure it's picking the right targets and you can't go wrong. The right targets are either buildings or strangely infantry, since this cannon actually fires more like a mortar than it does a standard anti-vehicle gun. It can still do a lot of damage versus vehicles, but it's much more effective versus infantry if you have the option and other units to take care of vehicles for it. Now we also have to cover the support centers. Each HQ can also build one of 3 support centers which will unlock you new abilities, units, and more. First up we have Air. This is very focused on support skills and upgrades for them. Straight away you unlock 3 new skills. High Altitude Recon Run gets you recon over a target area in the form of marking enemy units in the fog of war, instead of flat out removing it with the added bonus of being much harder to shoot down. The P-47 Strafing Run causes area damage and suppresses infantry in the target area, and the P-47 Dive Bomb will cause massive area damage in the selected area. In the Support Center, you can upgrade the Recon Run to remove fog of war, reduce the cost and recharge time of all skills, and increase the number of planes in the bombing runs for extra damage. Next up we have the Vehicle Support Center. The only thing you unlock right out the gate is the ability to build the M16 and 75mm versions of the M3 APC in the Weapons Support Center, as well as the ability to repair nearby vehicles to the HQ. From the building, you can complete research to increase the armor of most vehicles, upgrade all M4A1 Sherman tanks with 76mm guns, and unlock several new skills for vehicles. Specialized munitions unlocks unique abilities for each of the vehicle groups affected. M18s gain HVAP rounds, which increase damage and penetration to reduce area damage. The M4A1 and M8s gain canister shot, which deals devastating damage in an area at close range, which is most effective versus infantry. The 105 gains the white phosphorus barrage, which causes burn damage in an area while blocking line of sight. And the Shafi gains APCR, which increases penetration and damage versus vehicles. Smoke shells unlock smoke launchers on the Shermans and Shafis, and the smoke shot for Greyhounds, which essentially do the same thing of blocking line of sight. And finally, the Infantry Support Center. Right out the gate, this will deploy a captain's retinue and allow the HQ to train more. They have a mix of weapons with 2 Grands, a Tommy gun, and an LMG, meaning they can take part in any kind of infantry-based combat and do work, especially if they can get some good cover. But their real value isn't the damage they deal, it's in what they can do for your other units. They have a number of abilities that will assist allied units in a variety of ways. Leadership increases the XP gain of nearby allied units. Flanking maneuver increases the movement speed and reduces suppression and enemy accuracy on a target allied unit, and Rally to Me turns the unit into a retreat point, meaning any units you order to retreat will instead run to this unit rather than all the way back to base if they're closer. As well as this, they of course have their veterancy skills. Off-map mortar barrage, which calls in a mortar barrage in a target area, from mortars are off the map, hence the name, and Mark Vehicle, which makes an enemy vehicle easier to hit, take more damage, and have reduced armor versus all allied units. Either of these are great picks, so go with whichever you need at the time. If it's all infantry, then Barrage. If vehicles get involved, then Mark. From the center, you can research to reduce infantry ability cooldown and upgrade costs, grant all rifle, engineers, and bazooka squads demolition charges, and M6 anti-tank mines, increase the HP of all infantry entities, and grant small amounts of veterancy to all squads reinforced at the triage station. And finally, we also have 3 battle groups to choose from, which are 3 ability trees that can be upgraded over the course of battle. Airborne focus on air support with abilities to drop explosives, smokes, and supplies onto the field to assist your army. You also have possible upgrades for scout squads as well as paradrops for MGs, paratroopers, and anti-tank guns. The Pathfinders are an upgrade to the scouts, and they are more or less the same as the regular scouts, but they gain the support package by default as well as a rifle grenade for some extra offense. Paratroopers are very similar to regular riflemen, but have a number of key differences. They bring carbine weapons that are more effective at shorter range combat. They can upgrade to a bazooka or an LMG package for added offense versus vehicles or infantry. They swap the sticky bomb for a satchel charge, which will deal area damage after a short delay from close range, and they have 2 different veterancy skills. Quick capture increases the capture speed of territory, and concealment grants them stealth while stationary, in cover, and not in combat. Since they can only be paradropped into the battlefield, you'll want to use that and their skill set to your advantage by having them flank enemies with their close range weapons and explosives and take territory before they can be stopped. Just be cautious their landing zone isn't too hot, otherwise they might burn up shortly after entry. Next up, Armoured. This focuses on a lot of upgrades for vehicles with many buffs to them, such as increased starting XP, auto repair, reduced build costs, stat improvements, and even totally new units. Your engineers can be upgraded to assault engineers, they get an additional soldier as well as some more HP and offensive power. Honestly, it doesn't really change them that much, so just enjoy having another body in case they get caught in combat. You unlock the M31 recovery vehicle. This is really cool and can do a large number of actions. First of all, it is a non-combat vehicle, so it can only be used for support and cannot deal any damage of its own. However, it can repair damaged vehicles, salvage wrecked ones, or restore wrecked ones, including enemies. That means if you take out an enemy vehicle, you can send this thing in to restore it, allowing you to use enemy vehicles against them. Of course, you have to keep it safe while it works, and restored vehicles need some love before they're back in fine shape, but it's a ton of fun and pretty damn strong. The M8 Scott SPG comes with a 75mm howitzer that essentially acts as a mortar, dealing massive area damage and being very effective versus infantry no matter what cover they have. Use it like you would a mortar, just now enjoying it being a lot tougher to take out. It even comes with these same 2 abilities. For the veterancy skills, however, you have Light Phosphorus Barrage or Bunker Buster Barrage. Either are very powerful, so as always, it depends what you're fighting. And finally, you also unlock the M4A3E8 Sherman. This is very similar to the M4A1 Sherman with some very subtle differences. It has a 76mm gun compared to the old 75. It has less armor but more HP, so it's around the same level of toughness. It can't use canister rounds, and it has its own set of veterancy skills, HVAP rounds or flanking speed. Overall, it's a marginal difference, and it's a bit weird it's the end of the battle group. Yeah, it comes with a unit of riflemen already on it, but still, not really worth it if you ask me. And finally, we have Special Operations. This one focuses on quite a few things, but of course is more infantry focused than anything else. You have new units, buffs to their capture speed, and many support abilities. For the new units, first up the SSF Commando Squad. These are basically riflemen but have a selection of extra weapons to choose from. They have LMGs or bazookas, which they can switch between at will, so it can take out infantry or vehicles with ease. They also have the Willy Peak Grenade, which can cause area burn damage for a bit of extra power. And for their veterancy skills, they have Knife Throw, which takes out a single infantry model, or Time Demolition Charge, which deals massive area damage after a short delay. They're a great versatile unit that will be more effective the earlier you use them in battle, so rush them in the battle group to get the most use out of them while you can. We have the M29 Weasel. This is a non-combat transport and recon vehicle that can move infantry squads around the battlefield at a pretty decent speed. It starts off with no weapons but can upgrade to gain a 30 cal for more offense, but still focus on support and recon rather than battling. Doing this also loses the ability to transport squads, so make sure you want it before upgrading. It can also deploy MGs and mortars, so you can deploy weapons and man them wherever needed. And for the veterancy skills, first up we have Signal Layer, which passively increases the output of any points captured by the vehicle, or Medical Station, which will heal nearby infantry when they are out of combat and stationary. Both of these are great, and if you can capture a lot of territory early, then Signal Layer is great for added resources, but more than likely Signal Station will become a lot more useful later on, so it's the way to go for me. It's a tiny weak vehicle, but it can capture territory and zip around the map. so it could be a lot worse. And finally, we have the M4A1 Sherman Whizbang. This is a very unique unit as it is a rocket artillery unit armed with rapid fire rocket launchers and two 30 cals to fend off anything that gets too close. You can only use the rocket artillery via the rocket barrage ability as it cannot just automatically attack like your average mortar, so choose your targets very carefully to ensure you're going to get the most bang for the very long cooldown. For the veterancy skills, Precision Sweep, which causes burn damage over time with a scatter that increases over longer range. This actually shares the same cooldown as a regular rocket barrage ability. This ability has a much shorter cooldown, so if you use this over the other one, you're going to get more bang over time because cooldown shorter. Or Jettison the launcher, which loses the rocket launcher to turn it into a regular M4A1. Why you'd ever do this outside of an emergency is beyond me. If you want an M4A1, build one. If you want this, get this. Precision Sweep every time. That's everything you need to know about the US forces in Company of Heroes 3. If you want to see more videos for the other countries' rosters, let me know in the comments. And if you're looking at this and wishing there were a few more mechs, then check out this video here telling you all about the US forces in Iron Harvest.